Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us as we kick off this exciting new webinar series. My name is Kyle Barnhart and I'm with the GVSU Alumni Relations Office. I'm joined today by Melissa Perino from the GVSU Center for Adult and Continuing Studies and today's presenter, Professor Erica Curry-Vanny. This monthly webinar series is a partnership between Alumni Relations and the Center for Adult and Continuing Studies and will feature a range of topics for your personal and professional life. Today's webinar is Leading Ourselves and Others in the Age of Pandemic. Here to take us through this thought-provoking session that includes insights from more than 100 community leader interviews conducted over the last 2 months is Professor Erica Curry-Vanny. Erica inspires, empowers, and equips leaders to change their world. She has spent the last 2 decades improving the effectiveness of leaders, organizations, and communities through services that include leadership coaching and facilitation on strategy, planning, design, stakeholder engagement, organization and program development, talent alignment, and impact evaluation. She facilitates workshops on a variety of management topics, including purpose-filled leadership, creating and sustaining high-performing teams, strategic doing, adaptive leadership, and has worked with dozens of community and educational organizations in Michigan and across the country. Erica has taught a number of undergraduate and graduate courses at Grand Valley for the College of Community and Public Service, the Seidman College of Business, the Graduate School, and the Accelerated Adult Degree Completion Program, now known as the LEADS program in the Brooks College of Interdisciplinary Studies. Erica is a passionate Grand Rapids West Side resident who is active in the community, and she and her husband Brian have 4 grown children and 2 grandchildren.
Thank you, Kyle. Before we get started today, I know it's going to be a great conversation with Erica, and you may want to engage, and we hope that you want to engage. So I wanted to go over a little bit of our Zoom keeping. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a box with Q&A, and we would ask if you have any questions of Erica while you're listening, that you drop your questions in the Q&A box. We will be monitoring that as we go along and may ask a few questions during the program, but we'll definitely save time at the end for a formal Q&A period. We'll also be using the chat box today, and we'll be dropping some links in there for you as we go along. We are pretty certain that you're going to want to connect in with Erica, and so we'll drop a link in there for some ways you can do that. We'll also drop some links to other program information that we may have. So we're glad you're here, and we know that you're really going to enjoy it today. So Erica, thank you very much for being with us, and we're ready to roll with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa and Kyle. It's an absolute honor to be here today with you, and welcome to everybody who's joining us today for our webinar. It's a really important conversation that we're going to have today, and I'm thrilled to be able to present for the first time ever some of this new research, this new body of work that I think is going to be a little bit of a time capsule for our community. So let's start with, at this point, you should be able to see on your screen a PowerPoint that actually gives an introduction of how you can get in touch with me as well at Urban Curry Consulting. So I've divided this presentation in 2 different sections. The first section is about leading self, and the second section is about leading others. So I wanted to start by sharing with you a leadership lesson. And this is something that I love to introduce for all of my classes. On one of our last weeks of class, we come in and we share a leadership lesson that has informed us, that has helped us along the way. And so I want to start with that. And that is on the left-hand side, you'll see a picture of actually a little snow globe that I picked up in Paris. I happened to be in Paris on Friday the 13th, 2015, which, if you recall, that was 5 years ago, almost now, when Paris was under a terrorist attack. And I was just 2 blocks away from the Bataclan nightclub, which is where the majority of the attacks took place. So I was in a full restaurant with a group of 8 different people, and we were having dinner together, and within 5 minutes, the stairway to the basement was opened up. There was a TV on, there were people crying, and I could tell something really significant had happened. I didn't know what, but I knew it was big, and it felt like 9/11. To be honest with you, is the same kind of vibe. So the next morning when I was released from lockdown, went to breakfast and I picked up this snow globe, and I thought, this is a perfect metaphor for exactly what I just experienced. Like, everything I thought Paris was going to be was all shook up. And I didn't know what the picture was going to be when that settled, but I knew that it was going to settle eventually, and that life might not exactly return to normal, but life would return to some semblance of something I could get my head and heart around. And the picture on the right is another snow globe, but this was actually 5 years later on Friday, the 13th of March, when I was contacted by our dean, and he said, hey, how do you feel about leading your class fully online? We are flipping 5,000 classes because of COVID by Monday. And this was on a Friday. My class started on Tuesday. And I said, okay, yes, let's go for it. But in that moment, I just felt like everything really was shook up. And so you see that snow globe on the right where you can't really see what the picture is yet. And I would say the big difference this time is I do feel that the picture will fundamentally change for my life. I don't know what the picture will be, but I trust myself and I trust the process. And that would be my encouragement to all of you, that life does put situations before us, or sometimes we choose situations that shakes everything up. And on that journey, I just want to encourage you that eventually it does settle and we find our way. And so I just wanted to share that as a starting point. So the next picture you see here is a little bit of a funny in that it's me before and after quarantine. Of course, it's not truly me. This is Monica Geller from Friends. But it's a little bit like me. I actually have gained weight. I've gained at least 19 pounds as of getting on the scale this morning, on top of weight gain I already had. So I'm bigger. My hair is longer. I'm definitely haven't had my post-COVID hairdo done yet. So I feel like a lot has changed, but at the core, fundamentally, who am I before quarantine? Who am I after quarantine? Those remain consistent. The most important things about me remain consistent. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. Who were you before and after quarantine? It's hopefully for you, like for me, been a season of self-discovery. I've probably never spent this much time with myself. And it's been a really good opportunity for me to re-examine everything, because truly every aspect of my life changed. And I think for so many of us, that is the case. You know, if you've had me as a teacher before, that identity is something that I'm very passionate about. I was adopted at birth and I found my family 5 years ago when I was 45 years old. And so that has been an amazing process of self-discovery, of an exploration between nature and nurture. And I'm a very strong believer that the more we know who we are and understand ourselves, the more empathy we actually have for those in our world. And I think that's something that is really important right now. How do we lead with compassion? How do we lead with recognition of other people's identities? And especially post-COVID, now what have we seen in our world as an amplification of so many of the disparities that already existed. And maybe these questions of identity are never more important than they are right now, both for ourselves as well as for others that we lead and we love. And probably the most important thing that I hope you will take away is this truth that we often other the concept of leadership and we think it's somebody else, but the truth of it is we have to get up every single day. We have to have the will to live. We have to have the will to thrive. And whether that is just being able to get up out of bed, make your bed, take a shower, and navigate through your day, or whatever you define success as. It starts with leading ourselves. And the most important relationship we have in our life is the one we have with ourselves. And there is a direct relationship between our relationship with self and then the relationship we have with those around us. So I hope you've taken some time in this season to think about, what does it mean to lead myself? What guides your life and leadership is the first question I would have you think about. Here you'll see a purpose statement that I have, which Kyle shared with you when he introduced me, to inspire, empower, and equip leaders to change their world. That is what I believe that I am here for. And that leadership purpose has been consistent for me since I started my consulting practice almost 6 years ago now. I also have a very clear vision statement that has emerged over the last couple of years as I've integrated the experience of finding my biological family at age 45. And I believe that I am here to bring healing and wholeness to families, workplaces, and communities. So I feel very anchored by these different aspects of what guides my life and leadership. The third thing that I would say, and I want to be fully transparent with you, this third element about values is one that probably has been one I've contemplated more than anything else since COVID has started. Part of that is because in my research, what I began to realize is that people that make decisions based on their values, that seems to be a very anchoring and consistent kind of experience for folks. That people that are making decisions that are based in their core values, for example, even our governor, who had very strict parameters around the state, you can disagree with somebody, but if you know why they're making their decisions, it makes it a lot easier to accept. So I've been really wrestling with this question about what were the values that I was raised with, but what are the values that I want to hold? Who is it that I want to be in COVID and post-COVID? And so this really became very striking to me when my husband and I were walking down the street and he asked me something about what I was going to do with these recordings, if I was just going to release them on YouTube. And he was really asking a technical question, but I answered it with an ethical response because I said, oh, I would never share these on YouTube because I didn't get consent for that. And I'm a trustworthy person and I wouldn't share this without the consent of the people that I interviewed. And it wasn't until that moment at 50 years old that I really thought to myself, I am a trustworthy person. What does it mean to act in accordance with being trustworthy? And so I realized that's one of my core values. So I'm taking time to really reflect on that. What are the values that are most important to me? And how do I make sure I'm living my life in congruence with those values, that my behavior is consistent with the things that I say matter most? This is a great image that helps support that. Have you defined your core values? And I love this image because it's this tree. And I think about, 100-year-old oak tree. And I often wonder, gosh, if that tree could talk, what would be the stories that it would tell? But also, when the winds come, a person who has deeply embedded core values isn't going to necessarily shake with the wind in the same kind of way of those that haven't really thought about what are those core values. This is something that you want to have already thought through before they are tested. And so this is an important question. What are your core values? Another image that you'll note here, and if you've had me as a teacher, you will have seen this before, but one of my favorite questions is, are you living and leading on purpose? In other words, are you in that center space where you are loving what you do, the world needs it, you're great at it, and you're getting paid for it? I'm a believer that my goal personally is to spend at least 80% of my time in that space. And I think that when we're in that space, I call it flow. And it's really when all cylinders are firing, right? Our talents, our gift sets are completely aligned with our purpose. And we're in an environment that supports our ability to express that purpose. I think that this is something that I encourage you to not settle for less than. I do believe that every single one of us can be purpose aligned and that we can live and lead on purpose. And so that is my hope for you. And what are you doing the other 20% of the time? Hopefully you're on your growing edge and you're being challenged and you're learning new skills, because our optimal performance comes not when we're really dormant, but when we're actually actively expressing that purpose. Which leads me to my last question for us to consider before we do our first poll. Are you aligned and integrated across these three leadership settings? So we have our home space, our community space, and our workspace. And I think in Western society, particularly, we tend to disaggregate these three leadership settings. But the truth of it is that they are deeply integrated, and what's happening to us at home affects what's happening to us at work and in community. Maybe the experiences that we've had, not just living through COVID, but as we evolve into a post-COVID world, we are asking really important questions about all three of these leadership settings. I believe that we are designed to be aligned and integrated across these settings, and that the ideal is that when we can express our purpose across those places. So I want to share with you that for me, my community space really probably was my Airbnb. So my husband and I have a bed and breakfast, and we shut that down in February and just began receiving guests again. But that impacted me very much in terms of not being able to recommend my favorite restaurants or my favorite places to go to people that were coming here from out of town. And that has been a big shift in how do I lead, and not being able to lead in that space the way I have traditionally in the past. My workspace, as I shared, everything just kind of stopped for me, other than my one Grand Valley class, which I'm so grateful that it did, because it afforded me time to be able to do these leadership interviews, which I'll be sharing with you shortly today. But the area that has been hardest for me to lead in absolute transparency is the home space. I have a mom who is 85 years old and she's immunocompromised. I have a husband and myself who were both, he was working from home, fortunately not out of work, but we've had to really figure out what does that mean as we think about budgeting and as we live into the rest of 2020, and how do we plan for our home space. And then I have a sister that's going through a divorce, and a very difficult divorce, where she's got 5 kids, and so I'm spending a lot of time out of town trying to help her with her kids. So leading in the home space has by far been my most challenged setting. And I think just to normalize that we do go through times where these settings are more or less challenging for us, and that's okay. It's what it means to be human. So my first poll, we have 2 polls. First poll is, which of the 3 settings have you found it most challenging to lead? Has it been leading at home, at work, or in community? And, I think that this is a really important question. If you want to go ahead, just click on one of those, and then we're going to show the results in just a minute. But I would say that, I have so much respect for the recognition of how important it is to lead in the home space. This is something I've been teaching for years, but I think there's really truly a recognition, and we've seen the entire world alter as a result. How will we school our kids? How will we take care of parents? How will we feed ourselves and pay our bills and navigate all these various challenges of life? All right, so we've got, this is really interesting. We have quite a split, and look at that, home is number 1. And I think that's very true. And I think employers recognize this, because COVID is something that has escaped none of us globally. I mean, we've all been impacted, and this is probably the most defining event of every generation living on this planet, as well as this century. So thank you for that. I found that to be true too. Now I want to switch a little bit and talk about growth zones and comfort zones. So they have two images of how I teach about comfort zones. The one on the left is probably more the image that comes to mind when you think about how you would choose a growth zone, right? And push into an achievement of a courageous goal. I know there's at least one person on this call that's just gone back to get her master's degree. And so I'm super proud of you, Jamie. Just do a shout out. And that also comes with a growth zone. What does that mean when you're a professional and a wife and a mom and also trying to navigate work? That's a growth zone, but it comes with that achievement of that courageous goal. We also sometimes have circumstances that throw us out of our comfort zone, like COVID. And in those cases, a lot of times when we don't plan for it, that can really push us actually into the panic zone. So let's take a look at that a little deeper. One of the images that I found early on in COVID that I found to be so helpful was this question of who do I want to be during COVID? And I'll just tell you a little bit about my journey. Was when it first happened and we were told, don't be in large groups, and we're not sure, when we're ever going to be able to come out of the house again. I went to the grocery store and I bought so much food. I've never bought that much food. I ended up getting a 6-pack of ramen noodles that I haven't bought ramen noodles since I was back in college. I, of course, bought lots of toilet paper. I just was in a space of disparity and of want and of fear. And then as things began to progress, I started realizing, okay, you know what? I know what's happening here. I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling uncertainty. For me personally, all of my consulting work stopped pretty much the day that we were announced the stay-at-home order. And I also have a bed and breakfast. All of our reservations canceled. So of course I had some insecurity about what was going to happen with regard to my future. And the one thing I still had going was I was teaching this leadership dynamics class for Grand Valley. And actually, because of that, it helped me reframe and refocus and really get into a space about, okay, how am I going to lead other people through this? And that's where I first went to the learning zone. I began to really consider, everyone really is trying to do their best. There is very little I can control here. And, and then from there, I leaned into my purpose. Who am I? I have that purpose statement. And so how can I actually use those skills in service to others? And that's really where these leadership interviews were born. Was I have a lot of time on my hands. I'm very interested in helping leaders process through what this journey has been for them and learning from it. And I want to be in a space of gratitude, and I want to be able to adapt. And so I really went through this whole process of, where I first felt some panic and fear to, okay, what can I learn here? How can I grow from this? And I think this is very connected to our performance. And I want to say that, research tells us that being in a very lax space or being in our comfort zone too comfortable actually isn't really very good for us with regard to performance. We thrive when we have a little bit of healthy tension, right? But we also face exhaustion and burnout when it's too much. And so if you have felt yourself going along this curve, I just want to normalize that and say, it's absolutely okay. We've all been in that space. And the idea is to aim for that creative calm, right? That space where you're at your peak performance. And that is, it's a scale, it's a balance. It is something that you have to navigate every single day. But the 2% mindset, right? That most of us really do feel most comfortable in our comfort zone because it's easier and it doesn't require us to change and flex and adapt. But those of us that do embrace this moving out of our comfort zone, this is really where the magic happens. This is where transformation happens for us. And it also leads to opportunities to reframe. I think this is one of the most powerful tools. Is how do you look at things from many different perspectives? Because perspective taking allows you to choose how you're going to perceive a situation, which will directly
then connect with how you feel about a situation and how you respond to a situation. So that's connected to this idea of adopting a growth mindset. And, I want to say a couple things about growth mindset. One is that we're not all or nothing, for example, whenever it comes to anything with regard to teaching or facilitating or design or strategy, I have a growth mindset about it because I know that these are some of my best gifts. But when it comes to like packaging or fixing something or anything requiring heavy tools, I often defer to my husband because I have a fixed mindset about my abilities, my mechanical abilities, and my technical abilities. So I really challenged myself, even for this webinar. I said, I don't really know how to do video editing, but I'm going to learn because I can learn, I can grow. And so in essence, a growth mindset is just believing that I can continue to learn and unlearn and relearn. And research tells us, Carol Dweck's done a tremendous amount of research on mindset. And depending on that mindset that you adopt for yourself, it will profoundly impact how you lead your life and your outcomes. So I challenge us all to continue to adopt that growth mindset. And then the last image that I want to share in this section is something that I actually was taught way back in my undergrad of college. I studied psychology and theater in my undergrad years. And the Johari window model, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I'll just share briefly what this is these 4 quadrants of our lived experience. So there are things that are known to ourselves and others. On the upper left, that's the public arena. Where you work, information about your family, right? All sorts of things. Things that are unknown to others, but are known to ourselves. So those are the things that we choose to disclose, but we decide, are we going to share them or are we going to keep them in? And then on the upper right, what are the things that are known to others, but are unknown to us? What are things we don't see about ourselves? And then what I'm most fascinated by is this bottom right quadrant of what is unknown to us and what is unknown to others. Because I think as we lean into that, that's where we can see tremendous growth in our potential that we never knew existed. I think we're seeing a lot more of this collectively, this call for transparency. You can look at this from an organizational perspective, as well as a team perspective, a system perspective. But really, I want you to think about this in terms of your individual self-awareness, because we know that self-awareness is one of the primary building blocks for emotional intelligence. And so my challenge and encouragement is just to continue to lean into those questions about what is not known to me? Who are people that you trust that you can get valued feedback from? And what are the areas of discovery yet to happen within you and within your organizations? Things that are unknown to you, unknown to others. And I think we're going to discover a lot about that in the coming years. So part 2, let's shift gears. And I'm so excited to share with you about this body of work. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of how the leadership interviews happen. So I shared with you on Friday the 13th, I got the call from the dean saying, hey, how do you feel about teaching online? And I said, let's do it. So we did this bi-week accelerated class. This is now going to be part of the LEADS program. So this is a class you can actually take next spring. It's going to be 6 weeks now. But the first weeks, I'll just give you a sense of, remember going back to the image of who do I want to be in COVID, the fear zone, the learning zone, the growth zone. We just did a self-care challenge every week. And actually the students were the ones that said to me, we need you to hold this container for us. We need to be able to meet every week. This is a cohort model. So all these folks have been together for the last year. Suddenly they're not together. One of our classmates, one of the students had COVID. And so there were very deep bonds, and they said, please let us stay together. And I said, absolutely. And as I learned about what they needed, it was really basic self-care. Let's breathe together. Let's move together. Let's have gratitude together. And so we practiced that individually, and we practiced that together. And then I asked them, who do you want to hear from? I'm sure you're curious, as I'm curious. And what was so interesting is that they weren't asking to talk with the governor. They were asking about what was happening with our homeless population and what was happening with our prison population and what was happening with our most marginalized communities. Because at this point, early on, we could already see disparities that were playing out in regards to situatedness and how COVID was impacting folks. And so I gathered 8 leaders on our last week. We had our first 8 leaders, and those first 8 leaders were all focused on equity. So you can see we really had a range of folks, from people that were on the front lines with members of our community in service capacity, all the way to folks that are setting policy. It was amazing. And then I said, I really want to keep going with this. And there was some tremendous innovation from the Seidman School of Business. They said, you know what, we want to try out these 2-week mini classes and just have them focus on COVID. And so I was super excited about that, because I was fascinated by this idea about what does it mean to lead in the age of pandemic. And I wanted to look at the current leadership practices in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. So the students said, hey, here's who we want to hear from. And I actually just made up a list of different people I wanted to hear from. And I ended up doing 67 interviews for them to select and watch during class. And pull from. I thought, so much of equity is about access to networks, access to people. And this is something that I could do for students to increase their access. So in total, I actually still have 25 more interviews scheduled. I'm looking at this as a 2-month research project. So all of May, all of June. And in the end of this, we're going to have at least 100 leaders that will be part of this time capsule. All the leaders were asked the same questions. Who are you? How has COVID impacted you? What's been most challenging for you as a leader? What gives you hope? What are the leadership lessons you've learned? And what advice do you have for students? And really at the heart of it, I wanted to explore what are the skill sets and the mindsets and the technologies that are going to matter most as we think about leading in a post-COVID world. As a professor at Grand Valley, that is a responsibility that we have, is to keep it real and relevant for our students. And so I was very interested in just-in-time research that would give insight into these questions. This is a list of many of the people that have participated so far, and they range. Actually, we've got folks that are living across the world. These aren't all just local leaders, but what was really cool about this was the demographics. So I had made that list, and what I was surprised and thrilled to see is that almost half of the individuals that I interviewed were people of color. And that the gendered mix is actually a little bit more favored female right now, but when those interviews are done, I have a lot of interviews with more men coming up in the next couple of weeks. So that will be more balanced at the end, but it's still not a bad start. And then the sector split was awesome. It's pretty much a third almost. So I was thrilled about that. And then I went back and I compared it, and because I think what's so important that we have to remember as leaders is that representation matters, and I have and had people of color, people with disabilities, people of diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, I mean, you name it. And I wanted to make sure that we had representation, that every single student that clicked on an interview could find somebody that looked like them, that sounded like them, that they could learn from. So before I did these leadership interviews, I actually did some research on global leaders, and I looked at both how people were handling COVID, those that were going before us, but also how leaders have handled crises in the past. And so there were 3 main tenets that I learned. One was adaptive leadership. I kept hearing again and again this idea about pivoting early and often. Second, ethical leadership. How do you have values-driven decisions? Even if you disagree with how somebody makes a decision, if you understand why, what goes from, where that comes from, where the core values that anchors that decision, you can respect it. And I'll use our governor as an example. She was very clear that her number 1 priority was human life And so she was very strict and was aggressive in her response. But I don't know if you've even seen this week, they've had some maps that are showing the whole country. And we're one of only 2 states that's green, showing that we are in good shape when it comes to containing this virus. So I have tremendous respect for both her ability to say, this is why I'm making these decisions. I'm going to make data-driven decisions, and I'm going to make decisions based on my ethics. And then also we've been able to already see the outcome of that. And then third, this idea of responsive and trustworthy leadership, which really ties to communication. A rigorous commitment to consistent, transparent communication. This is what I was learning in the lit review. And so I had 35 articles. I narrowed it down to the top 12. And then I shared that with students along with these interviews. And this is an example of the kind of crisis leadership. I just want to take us back pre-COVID. So everyone will likely remember Captain Sucker, who landed that plane on the Hudson River, right? And there's even a movie about it. It's a great movie, actually, if you haven't seen it. But I love 2 things that he says that reinforces those early learnings that I had gleaned around adaptability and around ethics and around communication. So on the left, he talks about, hey, I didn't have time to plan what I was going to do. I needed to already have learned what I needed to learn. Right? Think about that. I needed to already have learned what I needed to learn and then pull it into practice in an adaptive situation. And then on the left side, he talks about, that day he had these internalized values and fundamental skills and knowledge that he had developed over decades that he brought to bear very quickly and that had to be immediately accessible to them. It is too late when you're in the midst of a crisis to say, wait, what am I about? Right? Or maybe that is the perfect time to anchor you and say, hey, what am I about? But I think the truth of this whole pandemic has been that it is called each of us to question those deepest values and to really think about our practice of leadership. So let's talk a little bit about the learnings from local leaders. Not only did they affirm what I had learned from the research, they said, yes, being adaptive, ethics, and communication are all really important, but I also learned some other really fascinating things. One, and maybe first and foremost, was the importance of mental health and self-care for all. I had so many leaders say, you know what, we need to extend grace to ourselves and we need to extend grace to others. And so I have so much appreciation for this because I think mental health is often stigmatized and not prioritized and integrated as it should be. And so to hear leaders saying, look, I really don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in an unprecedented situation and I'm just doing the best I can to take care of myself and take care of the people on my team, was incredibly transparent and honest. There was also a very deep recognition of situatedness around life circumstance. And this was something that I really, I saw very quickly as well. You know, my mom is immunocompromised, she's 85. So life for her post-COVID looks very different than for me as I am participating in the reopening of our community and our state and our country. So that situatedness, along with that recognition, there was a recognition of that there are disparities, that, both there was this willingness and desire to listen to the people around them, to recognize that everybody is going to be impacted differently, to recognize that we have disparities that are going to require this systemic change. And I'm hearing a commitment from leaders that I've never heard before. And then along with that, so the how, there's really, I think, a renewed empathic leadership and a commitment to innovation. So, many people talking about it's not an either or about when we go back to school in the fall, it's both and. We're going to have to make sure that immunocompromised kids have choices on how they're going to learn, and teachers and work staff, you name it, we're going to have both and, not either or. And then Not surprising, but very affirming, because I've done a lot of work in the area of emotional intelligence. There was an emphasis on soft skills, especially around, what's your advice to students? What would you share with students that are entering the workforce that's very uncertain today? And this idea about staying flexible and being comfortable with ambiguity and being able to problem solve and be on a team and have this tech savvy. So all the things that we know are really emotional intelligence. In fact, that emotional intelligence is so important that I wanted to share a quick image about what exactly does that mean when we talk about emotional intelligence. So the social emotional core competencies, really, I shared earlier, it's about first self-awareness. You have to have self-awareness. That's the first building block. And self-management then goes very closely with that. There needs to be a social awareness about what's happening around you in the world, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. So this model works for kids, it works for adults, it works for all of us. And it's something important that we need to keep practicing. So second poll, and then I'm going to share with you the voices of our leaders. So I've given you a lot to think about, and I know that it's a lot, but I also know this is being recorded, and so you can watch it again. But I've given you 7 different, I think, key areas that I want to challenge you to think about going deeper on and having a conversation with somebody in your life about this webinar later, today, tomorrow, about something you learned. So if you were to pick a topic that you want to learn more about after this webinar, what would you say it would be? Go ahead and take a minute. For me, it's clarifying my core values. I'm going to spend more time on that this weekend. That's my homework. Defining my purpose. All right, excellent. Yeah, that's great. Wonderful, thank you. So let's go ahead and hear from some of our leaders. I have 10 different leaders that I'm going to share with you, and most of them are short clips of about a minute to a minute and a half. I think Dr. Adam London is the longest clip, but I just wanted to give you the voice of our amazing leaders and how they're navigating through COVID and post-COVID. So here's Dr. Adam London, who is keeping all the data and managing our Kent County Health Department.
So your first point about the epidemiological curve, we have seen that has flattened substantially. It is nowhere near as bad as we originally feared that it was going to be. But that's not because COVID-19 is less than what we thought it was going to be. It's really because people were prepared. And I think we had the benefit here in West Michigan to see how bad this was in Italy, in Spain, in New York City, in the Washington area. And so we were in Detroit, of course. And so people here took it seriously, and they prepared and they responded. They socially distanced themselves, and they washed their hands, and they've been wearing masks. They've been doing all the things that we've asked by and large. And so we have flattened the curve dramatically. But I would just caution people not to assume that because we have weathered this first storm, that now it's going to be smooth sailing from here on, and the problem is done. The reality is probably going to look more like waves crashing on the beach than it's going to look like one mountain. And everyone originally was thinking this is going to be one mountain of cases, and then we're going to be over it. I think our reality is probably going to be seeing waves and peaks and valleys over the course of the next year. To your question about disparities, yes, we are now very clearly seeing that people in the Latinx community are representing a larger portion of our total caseload than what their proportion of the population overall would indicate. Thankfully, that hasn't really manifested itself in the death count so far. Our death numbers look different than our total case numbers and their demographic distribution. The death numbers are skewed very much to an older age group, and they're also very much skewed to people who are living in long-term care homes. So these multiple risk factors of a congregate living environment, plus an older population with multiple underlying health conditions is really a lot to deal with.
And then what about African American community? Are we also seeing the same disproportionality that we are seeing in the Latinx community?
Not quite so much. We are seeing, to be clear, we are seeing that African Americans do make up a disproportionate percentage of our overall cases. I think they're right around 20% of our cases, and they make up about 11% of our population here in Kent County. So we are seeing a disparity, to be clear, but it's not quite as extreme as it is with the Latinx community.
All right. Next, Rosalynn Bliss from the city of Grand Rapids, our mayor.
I've known and talked pretty publicly for years about the racial disparities that exist in our city. And what can we do? You know, government was a part of creating those structures and that systemic racism that we see today, and we need to be a part of dismantling it. And for me, the COVID-19 has really amplified the deep disparities, racial disparities that have always existed. And it really drives us, in my opinion, to do more. I think that the challenge has been is that recognizing that social determinants of health are having a huge impact on people who are getting sick and people who are dying from COVID, and that takes more than just the city responding, right? Like, we really need to come together as a community in partnership with the county that has a lot of services, and then our health systems, and make sure that we're working together so that the future looks different if we have to go through a pandemic again. And so it's been challenging, but I also think that we have been really intentional, especially at the city, to identify what we can do to support not just families, but businesses in areas of our city that we know experience a lot of racism, and where there is systemic racism and disparate outcomes. So in the city of Grand Rapids, we have 17 census tracts where we know there's significant systemic racism and racialized outcomes. We call them neighborhoods of focus. And even through this budget process, we are continuing to invest more into those neighborhoods. And then also, as we look at CDBG funding, we'll use that in target areas. And then we're also being very, very intentional in supporting minority-owned businesses to help them get through this. And we're also working with our partners to do that as well.
And here's Tasha Blackmon, the CEO of Cherry Health.
We believe that, you know, a holistic approach to healthcare is what truly shifts the narrative when it comes to healthcare disparities, when it comes to health in general. You know, you've got to have a holistic approach. So I would say you can't just illuminate this one issue without talking about where people work, learn, live, and play. You know, they've got to be in a situation where they make a salary where they can take care of their family. You know, and $9 an hour doesn't do that. We know that the living wage in our area is much higher than that. You know what I mean? So you got to do that. Your zip code should not determine how well you're educated or whether or not you go to college. It just shouldn't. You know, so I could go on and on, but I just think that it's a systemic issue that has to be approached from multiple levels. This is not hey, this is a racial disparity and we'll snap our finger and it'll go away. No, it is a systemic issue that is fraught with institutionalized racism. It is fraught with, just communities of people that don't get it, that don't understand, because maybe it isn't their lived experience. But just because you didn't live that experience doesn't mean you can't be compassionate or empathetic to it. Because I know plenty of people that, maybe they weren't poor, or maybe they didn't grow up in poverty, that have a heart for the underserved. I work with 855 of them here at Cherry Health. You know, many of our staff could work anywhere in this community, but they choose to serve here. They choose to serve here. So, you know, I think that it really takes a systemic and systematic approach to addressing all of the things that play into racial disparities. And again, I will boil it down to, you got to address where people work, learn, live, and play. That's what it is.
Chris Andrus, the CEO of the Mitten Brewing Company and the Mitten Foundation.
I have led the process tried to lead the process with vulnerability and transparency with the staff. You know, Max and I have been involving them in the process. We've been having a lot of, you know, live chats with the staff saying, listen, we don't know exactly what's happening here, just like you don't know, but we're going to err on the side of taking care of you guys. And I want you guys to help us form the new policies. What are the cleaning duties? What's going to make you feel safe to be at work? And letting myself off the hook for having to have all the answers has been really a key part of this, because they have answers, they have ideas. And I learned that they're not really looking to me for strength all the time. They're looking for me to be a partner, to be empathetic to the struggles, and allow them to see themselves in the process of beating those, you know, overcoming those challenges. And I feel like that's created a stronger bond, and that's why we have so many people that came back to work.
Jorge Gonzalez of Start Garden.
So my biggest takeaway as far as, you know, leadership lessons is that it's okay. It's okay to pivot. It's okay to go with the times. And if the time is now and the need is now, do it now, and not be like, oh, you know what, well, we'll just stay afloat. And no, because staying afloat means that, you know, we weren't able to help 68 entrepreneurs that needed to stay afloat, where we are good. So I think that's a leadership lesson, that sometimes as leaders, you are complacent and you're like reluctant to change because everything's going so good. And in times of turmoil, that's when you need to just put on your thinking hat and say, you know what, forget about what was working. Let's focus on what's needed right now.
Goei of Eastern Floral.
Change will always happen. So, you know, so don't be afraid of facing those changes, and you know, prepare yourself to be the best what you can be with the talents that you have been given. You know, you can say, listen, I can say, well, you know, I want to be like Michael Jordan, but I couldn't shoot worth a lick, right? I mean, that's not my talents, right? So, you know, so don't look at others for what you should be. Look at yourself and say, what can I be? And once you get on that pathway, then allow yourself, and I think you mentioned this, Erica, allow yourself to be humble enough to listen. Just listen. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Wayman Britt, who's the administrator of Kent County.
I know that number one, I'm not perfect. Number two, I need to work on improving who I am. And number three, I don't know it all. You know, so that's the lesson for me. And then I need to figure out, how do I equip myself so that I can do this dance with everybody else? And then how do I make you better? How do I step on your shoes so that you don't lose your shine? How do I tell you what you need to hear, but in a way that you can receive it? That's what my job is. And that's what I've learned. I have to be willing to confront bad behavior in my team and deal with the negative, sometimes selfish motives that interplay, internal as well as out there, because we're human beings and we're all flawed. We're selfish by nature. Been that way from day one. You know, so understanding all of that, I need to retreat back and say, how do I help or hurt the situation?
Kim Dabbs from Steelcase. She heads up Global Impact and is based in Munich.
all of those principles that we talked about initially from a Steelcase perspective are the things that we look for in leadership at the country level or the global level. These are human traits. These are human qualities. You see each culture adapt and respond to these issues based upon their history and cultural context. So in Europe, you're seeing a lot of people understand more of the collective impact, so a collective response for individual safety, where other countries that are having more individualism are taking a look at individual rights versus collective safety. So all of these, I think, can commingle by keeping people at the heart and at the center of the response. And at the end of the day, people just want to be safe. People want their families to be safe. People want their workplaces to be safe. And even I would say if it's culturally not the norm, it's becoming the norm because of the fact that not just local laws or country laws are requiring it, but because humans, individuals are really vocalizing their expectation.
Dr. Brandy Lovelady Mitchell with the Kent Intermediate School District.
I remember growing up, I used to think about what kind of leader I wanted to be. And as I have been in formal leadership roles, I've learned lessons that have helped me understand it's equally important to understand the type of leader you do not want to be. And really thinking through that and having your own set of core principles that are always guiding you, because things are emergent and changing forever, but those principles that you have will root us. God knows that I've made mistakes, but the older I am, I'm clearer about things that matter and want to be intentional in operating from those things. And that means being inclusive and speaking out against injustices to create a better world. Yeah.
And last but not least, Philomena Mantella, our president of Grand Valley State University.
Build your own social networks. I mean, we were talking about networks, so it's a perfect place to pick up your own social capital. Be sure that you're finding people around you that are going to help you with your thinking in terms of what's next, because the choices might be complicated. And don't give up on these really important things in your life. You know, fight for them. I like that language because that's what it is. It's we want them. We need to pursue them. They're important to us, so we fight for them.
So I know that was a lot and just a small sample of the amazing wisdom that is here in our community. With that, I want to pause and see what kind of questions you may have. Reactions, questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And then, all right, here we go. And Melissa, I think, is going to lead us through this.
We'll start with Kyle, I think. And
yeah, just thank you for that, Erica. A reminder to everybody, if you have questions or comments you'd like to make, go ahead and drop that in the Q&A box. Melissa will kind of facilitate us through some of the questions here for, maybe 5 minutes or so.
And I just want to reiterate, Erica, thank you so very much for starting the thought of thinking about leading ourselves and leading others and encouraging us to think more and dive a little bit deeper. We, one of the questions really says, what kind of suggestions might you have for managing energy levels and time to balance survival issues while also trying to become our best selves, which I think the question, as you're thinking of the response, really speaks to one of the slides you shared, which was a little bit about aiming for creative calm. Mm-hmm. And how do we find that creative calm while trying to thrive in this time of uncertainty?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Well, I think it's a little like cooking, right? So when I'm making my guacamole, that's my signature thing, right? So, okay, what do I need to add here? Lime, a little bit of cilantro,
a little more of this, a little more of that. And I do think that that performance curve is very much something that's like a scale that you're constantly checking in and balancing. I think that there are some definite mindfulness kinds of practices that, you know, so much of it is about just taking the time to have solitude. And one of my favorite exercises, in fact, if anybody who's on here that has been in my class, or that I know there's a number of folks that will be familiar with this, but boxed breathing, if you even Google boxed breathing, that is one of my favorite exercises to get myself back into myself, right? And so basically it's counts of four counts in, and then you hold for 4 counts, and then 4 counts out, and you hold for 4 counts, and then you repeat it 3-4 times. And I've now, you know, I'll do like counts of 10, you know, I'll try to increase my counts to do some kind of practice that gets me in that creative calm, in that space of calm. I also think it's so interesting because, you know, when this first hit, I work from home. So I didn't really have the same kind of struggles as so many of my friends and colleagues did around how do I structure my day. So I think that's part of it too, is knowing when are you at your absolute best, right? And when are you, what do you need to do to tweak your schedule, the structures around you, the supports around you, so that you can maintain that equilibrium. And I think having real conversations with your support people, whether that is a leader in your organization, a staff member on your team, a partner in your household, I think keeping yourself anchored to you, a lot of times when we get into that burnout space, it's because we've lost touch with ourselves. And so staying connected with self, knowing self, and trusting the journey, I think is a big part of that.
So true. That's fantastic. So you talked about our networks of support and relying on those. One person asked really about being, or spoke about being a mentor, and how that's really changed in light of what is going on in our worlds, and not only providing support for ourselves, but then how we provide support for others, and thinking about mentoring colleagues and students, or even peers sometimes. Go
ahead.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's great. In terms of mentoring, I think is crucial, and absolutely. I think there's a couple things I'd say about this. One is I try to live my life with this perspective of there's always somebody that is mentoring me. In fact, Glenna Decker is one of my mentors in instructional design and technology. I think she's here with us today. There's always somebody I'm journeying with, and then there are always people that I'm mentoring. So I think that's the circle and the balance of life that we're called to. But I also think very explicitly with regard to Black Lives Matter, which was also commented here, I believe that sharing power, right? It comes down to that. We have to share our power. And by that, I mean sharing our networks, sharing our wealth, sharing our knowledge, our wisdom, sharing access, because that is the big differentiator. When you have access to these networks, it's life-changing. And, you know, I had several different folks, Birgit Close from The Right Place talked extensively about that. You know, you all are the future. And so it's up to us to pave the way, and to really make sure that when we're giving folks opportunity and responsibility, we're also thinking about what kind of supports might they need to be successful. You know, it may mean we walk alongside, we hold your hand and walk alongside and be your cheerleader. And then, you know, then you're more independent to be able to do it next time around, right? So I'm absolutely a huge believer in that. I think that's crucial.
Oh, Erica, we are unfortunately running out of time, and we're getting some really great questions as well coming in, and I do want to make sure that we honor folks' time and let them leave if they need, but we also have several links we want to include in the chat feature for folks to be able to connect in with you. We also want to be able to ask people. This was our first venture into a collaborative webinar, and we really want feedback about how we can make that better. I see someone asked for some good resources about defining purpose. They want to learn more and dig a little bit deeper. So we will be sure to include many of those links and try to answer some of these questions in a follow-up email that we send to those, you know, who attend here. But in the meantime, too, we're going to drop a link to the webinar survey that will be able to be found at gvsu.edu/alumni/webinar survey. We would also like to share, thank you for your willingness to share your LinkedIn profile. So if folks have not yet connected with you, I love that I saw a comment about feeling like you're reconnected from class, but there's Erica's LinkedIn profile as well if you would like to connect in with her. You're also teaching a couple of courses this next year that folks may find relevant. You're doing in the fall a management course for Seidman about organizational development, and then teaching in the LEADS program, which is that adult accelerated degree completion program in the winter for folks looking to get bachelor's degrees or looking to just get some content as well. There's a list of many other ways that you as attendees can learn more. We sort of called this series Lakers Learn More. And so you can visit gvsu.edu/advance if you would like to look at some of the different badges and certificates and different credentials that GVSU does. And I think one of the most important things is that if you're joining us as an alum, GVSU has rolled out a new initiative that is called the Laker Lifetime Learning Commitment. And this is one teeny tiny small piece, which is connecting you to some of the amazing resources on campus, like Erica and more. But the L3 initiative will also give you cash. Thank you, Kyle, for sharing that in there. If you do want to go ahead and come back and continue your academic journey or your learning journey, we appreciate each and every one of you being willing to share time with us today. And we hope to see you in July. We'll be having our friends from Career Services talk about navigating career resources as well. So thank you, and please give us your feedback about the series. We're glad you were here.
Yes, and if your question was not answered, please connect with me on LinkedIn and I will connect back with you. And